In 1991, two divers descended to an unknown shipwreck 60 miles off the coast of New Jersey. What they found on the seafloor was impossible. A German U-boat, fully intact, resting in American waters where no German submarine had any business being. Official records were clear. Every U-boat lost in World War II had been accounted for, every wreck location documented. The German Naval Archives confirmed it. The American Navy agreed. This submarine did not exist. But there it was, 230 feet down, waiting. The divers spent 6 years trying to identify the wreck. 3 men died in the attempt. When they finally recovered an artifact with a name engraved on it, the discovery rewrote history. The submarine had been officially sunk off the coast of Africa, 5,000 miles from where it actually rested. But the location was not the only thing the records got wrong. When investigators examined the damage patterns on the hull, they discovered something far more disturbing. The crew of this submarine was not killed by Allied forces.
They were killed by something else entirely. Then, in 1991, a fishing boat captain mentioned something unusual to a diver named Bill Nagel. Nagel was a legend in the wreck diving community. He had explored dozens of shipwrecks along the American East Coast and possessed an encyclopedic knowledge of what lay on the sea floor. The captain told him about a location 60 miles offshore where his nets kept snagging on something large. The coordinates did not match any known wreck. Nagel was intrigued. He assembled a team of experienced divers, including John Chatterton, widely regarded as one of the best technical divers in the world. In September 1991, they motored out to the coordinates and dropped anchor. The depth finder showed a significant object on the bottom, 230 feet down. Chatterton was among the first to descend. What he found on the sea floor made no sense. A submarine, German construction. The distinctive conning tower design was unmistakable. The hull appeared largely intact, sitting upright on the sand. Hatches were closed. The boat looked almost preserved, as if it had been gently placed on the bottom rather than destroyed in combat. Chatterton surfaced confused. He checked every reference he had access to. No German submarine was recorded lost anywhere near the New Jersey coast. The closest documented U-boat wreck was hundreds of miles away. According to every official history, this submarine simply did not exist. The divers contacted the Naval Historical Center in Washington. Officials listened politely and then dismissed the claim. The records were clear. All U-boat losses were accounted for. Whatever the divers had found, it was not a German submarine.
Or, if it was, it must be a boat already documented elsewhere. But Chatterton had seen the wreck with his own eyes. He had touched the steel. He had swum through water that had not been disturbed since 1945. The submarine was real. Someone was wrong. Either the divers were mistaken about what they had found, or the combined naval archives of Germany, the United States, and Britain had made an error that had persisted for 50 years. The divers gave the wreck a temporary name while they worked to identify it. They called it UW. The mystery consumed them. What was a German submarine doing in American waters? How had every navy in the world missed it? The obsession that would cost 3 lives had begun. U-869 was a Type 9C-40, one of Germany's long-range attack submarines designed to cross the Atlantic and hunt Allied shipping in distant waters. Built at the Decimog shipyard in Bremen, the boat was commissioned in January 1944 and spent months in the Baltic Sea conducting training exercises and working up the crew. The commander was Helmut Nyerberg. At 29 years old, he was young for a U-boat captain, but not unusually so. The war had consumed experienced officers faster than the Marine could produce them. Nyerberg had served on other submarines before receiving his own command. He was competent, careful and aware of what awaited him in the Atlantic. The crew numbered 56 men. They were a mix of veterans who had survived previous patrols and young sailors who had never seen combat. The average age was barely 20. Some were teenagers, pulled from homes and schools and factories to serve aboard a machine designed to sink or be sunk.
They trained together for months, learning the intricate choreography of submarine operations. Every man had a role. Every role was essential. In the confined steel tube of a U-boat, incompetence killed everyone. By late 1944, the U-boat service had become something close to a death sentence. The numbers told the story with brutal clarity. Earlier in the war, German submarines had dominated the Atlantic. Wolf packs hunted Allied convoys with devastating effectiveness, sinking millions of tons of shipping and nearly strangling Britain's supply lines. The U-boat was the terror of the seas, invisible and lethal. But the Allies had adapted. Radar systems detected surfaced submarines at night. Sonar tracked them underwater. Long-range aircraft patrolled the shipping lanes, dropping depth charges on any contact. Escort groups developed coordinated tactics for hunting submarines to exhaustion. Code breakers read German communications and routed convoys away from danger. The hunters had become the hunted. By the time U-869 was ready for combat, the survival odds had inverted catastrophically. U-boats were being destroyed faster than Germany could build replacements. Of the roughly 40,000 men who served in the U-boat arm during the war, approximately 30,000 would die, a casualty rate of 75%. No other branch of any military service on any side suffered losses that severe. The men who climbed aboard U-869 for its first war patrol understood these statistics. They had watched other boats depart and never returned. They had attended memorials for friends who vanished somewhere beneath the waves. They went anyway. Some believed in duty. Some believed in Germany. Some simply had no choice. In November 1944, U-869 departed from Kristiansand, Norway, bound for the American eastern seaboard. The orders were straightforward: cross the Atlantic, patrol the shipping lanes off New York and New Jersey, sink anything flying an Allied flag, return home. The submarine slipped beneath the gray waters of the North Sea and headed west into the Atlantic. 56 men sealed inside a steel cylinder, sailing toward a coastline they would never see. U-869 was never heard from again. After the war ended, naval historians on both sides undertook the grim task of accounting for every submarine lost in combat. The German records were meticulous despite the chaos of defeat. The Allied records were thorough, cross-referenced with attack reports, intelligence intercepts, and prisoner interrogations. Every U-boat that failed to return was assigned a cause of death in a location. For U-869, the official determination seemed straightforward. On February 28, 1945, Allied forces reported attacking a submarine off the coast of Morocco, near Gibraltar. The engagement was logged, the coordinates recorded, the kill confirmed. When analysts matched the date and location against U-boats known to be operating in the area, U-869 fit the profile. The submarine had been assigned to patrol those waters. It had stopped responding to radio contact around that time. The conclusion was obvious. U-869 was sunk off Gibraltar by Allied forces. Case closed. The German Naval Archives in Flensburg accepted this determination. The families of the 56 crew members were notified that their sons and husbands had perished in the eastern Atlantic, not far from the African coast. Memorial records listed Gibraltar as the final resting place. Historians wrote the loss into books and databases. For nearly 50 years, no one questioned it. The submarine was accounted for. The dead were mourned. The war moved further into history. The wreck site was not a place for casual exploration. 230 feet of water separated the surface from the submarine. At that depth, the ocean becomes hostile in ways that most people never experience. The water temperature hovered near freezing year-round. Current swept unpredictably across the seafloor, capable of pinning a diver against the hull or dragging them away from the anchor line. Visibility varied from acceptable to absolute zero depending on conditions. Some days the water was clear, other days it was like swimming through ink, but the depth itself was the primary killer. At 230 feet, nitrogen narcosis begins impairing judgment. Divers describe the sensation as similar to being drunk. Simple tasks become confusing, time distorts, critical decisions get delayed or forgotten entirely. Every breath at that depth consumes air at a rate 7 times faster than at the surface. A tank that lasts an hour in shallow water empties in minutes. When the air runs out, there's no swimming to safety. The surface is too far away. The submarine's interior multiplied every danger. Jagged metal edges weighted to snag equipment or slice through suits. Collapsed compartments created mazes with no clear exits. Decades of accumulated silt covered every surface. The slightest movement stirred it into blinding clouds that could reduce visibility to zero in seconds.
A diver who became disoriented inside the wreck might never find the way out. Despite these hazards, the divers kept returning. The mystery demanded answers. John Chatterton made dive after dive, penetrating deeper into the wreckage with each attempt. He found human remains almost immediately. Bones scattered through the control room mixed with debris and silt. He found artifacts, dishes, equipment, personal items, but nothing with a name, nothing with a hull number. German submarines carried identifying tags throughout their interiors, manufacturer plates, serial numbers, designations stamped into equipment. This submarine had none. Every identifying mark appeared to have been removed intentionally. The absence sparked new theories. Was this a secret mission? Had the crew erased the submarine's identity deliberately before departing? The mystery deepened with every dive. Then the wreck started claiming lives. In October 1992, Chris Rouse and his son Chrissy descended to the submarine. Both were experienced divers. Both understood the risks. Something went wrong in the darkness below. They stayed too long, went too deep, pushed beyond the margins of safety. Both surfaced unconscious. Both died before reaching the hospital. Father and son killed by a submarine that officially did not exist. The diving community was devastated. Some argued the wreck should be abandoned. The mystery wasn't worth more deaths. Chatterton refused. If anything, the tragedy made identification more urgent. The Rouses deserved to know what killed them. The German families deserved to know where their sons actually rested. The obsession continued. As the divers accumulated hours on the wreck over months and years, a picture of the submarine's final moments began to emerge. The evidence was written in twisted steel and shattered compartments. Reading it required patience, expertise, and a willingness to accept conclusions that challenged everything the official record claimed. The damage was concentrated in the control room area, the nerve center of any submarine. A massive hole gaped in the pressure hull. The metal was torn inward, peeled back by tremendous force. This was not the gradual failure of a boat losing a battle against flooding. This was instantaneous, catastrophic.
Whatever hit U-869 had killed it in seconds. The pattern of destruction told a specific story to anyone who understood naval warfare. Depth charges leave a particular signature. They explode above or beside a submarine, crushing the hull through concussive force. The damage spreads across a wide area. Multiple detonations create overlapping zones of destruction. The steel bends and buckles under external pressure. The damage on U-869 looked nothing like that. The hole was focused, precise. The force had come from a single point of impact. The steel was torn inward, not crushed from outside. This was torpedo damage. But the conclusion created an immediate problem. Who had torpedoed U-869? Allied records contained no submarine engagements anywhere near the New Jersey coast during the time frame when U-869 would have been operating. No destroyers reported torpedo attacks in the area. No aircraft claimed a submarine kill with airdrop torpedoes at those coordinates.
If an Allied vessel had sunk a U-boat 60 miles from the American mainland, it would have been documented, celebrated, recorded in multiple overlapping sources. There was nothing. The Allied forces had not killed this submarine. The answer, when researchers finally assembled the evidence, was almost too terrible to believe. German torpedoes in late 1944 were equipped with acoustic homing systems. The technology was cutting edge for its time. Designed to give U-boats an advantage against maneuvering targets, these torpedoes could be fired in the general direction of a ship and would then seek out the loudest source of engine noise in the water. They could adjust their course, circling until they found a target. The technology was also deeply flawed. Sometimes the acoustic seekers failed to acquire a target, sometimes they locked on to the wrong sound, and sometimes, in a nightmare scenario that German submariners knew about but could do nothing to prevent, the torpedoes circled back toward the loudest noise in the water, the submarine that had fired them. Evidence from the wreck suggested U-869 had launched a torpedo shortly before its destruction. The tube positions, the state of the torpedo room, small details all told a story of a boat that had been hunting, not hiding. The most probable scenario was straightforward and horrifying. U-869 had detected a target. Commander Nuremberg had ordered a torpedo fired. The weapon malfunctioned. Instead of tracking toward the intended victim, it curved through the water, seeking noise, and found the loudest source available, the diesel engines of U-869 itself. The crew would have had no warning. Acoustic torpedoes were silent. There would have been no approaching noise, no time to react, no chance to dive or maneuver.
One moment the men were at their stations, waiting for the sound of a distant explosion confirming their kill. The next moment, their own weapon detonated against the control room. The flooding would have been immediate in the blast zone. Anyone in the control room died within seconds. But U-869 was a large submarine, over 250 feet long, divided into multiple watertight compartments. The men in the forward torpedo room and the aft engine spaces were separated from the control room by heavy steel doors. Not everyone died in the explosion. Some of the crew was still alive when the submarine began its fall to the sea floor. John Chatterton refused to give up on identification. Year after year, he returned to the wreck, pushing deeper into compartments that had claimed other divers' lives. The mystery had become personal. Every dive was a gamble. Every penetration into the darkness carried the possibility of becoming the next casualty. The interior of U-869 was unlike the orderly graveyards sometimes found in submarine wrecks. There were no men at their stations, no final poses of duty, be maintained across decades. The inside of this boat told a story of violence and chaos.
Human remains were scattered throughout the accessible compartments, bones mixed with debris, skulls wedged in impossible places. Bodies had been thrown by the force of the explosion, tumbled as the submarine spiraled downward, then settled randomly as the boat came to rest. The silt that covered everything made systematic searching nearly impossible. Disturbing any surface created instant blackout conditions.
Chatterton learned to move with agonizing slowness, letting sediment settle before proceeding. He found personal effects preserved by the cold water: shoes, uniform fragments, equipment that had not been touched since 1945, but nothing with identification, nothing that answered the question of which submarine this was. The distribution of remains revealed something else, something terrible. Most of the bones in the control room area showed evidence of violent trauma, fractures consistent with blast impact. These men had died instantly when the torpedo struck. They were the lucky ones. But remains were also found in the aft compartments, the engine room, the maneuvering spaces, areas separated from the control room by watertight doors. The damage patterns suggested these doors had been sealed either before the explosion or immediately after. The aft sections showed no direct blast damage. The men in those compartments had survived the initial impact. Chatterton understood what this meant. He had studied submarine disasters. He knew the mathematics of survival at depth. When the torpedo detonated, the control room flooded instantly. The bow section would have followed within seconds or minutes as water found pathways through damaged bulkheads. But the aft compartments were intact, sealed. The men inside would have felt the explosion, heard the catastrophic roar of water flooding the forward sections, felt the deck tilt as the submarine lost buoyancy and began its descent. They would have known exactly what was happening. 230 feet is not survivable without proper decompression. Even if the men in the aft sections could open a hatch, even if they could escape the sinking submarine, they could not reach the surface alive. The pressure differential would kill them. They were sealed inside a steel coffin, sinking toward the bottom with no possibility of rescue. The lights would have failed when the electrical systems flooded. Emergency lanterns might have provided flickering illumination for a time. The men would have gathered in the darkness, feeling the hull groan under increasing pressure, waiting for the end. Some might have hoped the boat would somehow stabilize. Others would have known better. The descent to 230 feet takes only minutes. The air inside a sealed compartment lasts longer. Those men had time to understand their fate before it arrived. In 1997, 6 years after the first dive on the wreck, Chatterton found what he had been searching for: a knife buried in silt, wedged beneath debris in the aft section. He brought it to the surface and cleaned away the corrosion. Engraved on the handle was a single word: Horenberg. Research confirmed that Martin Horenberg was a torpedo man assigned to U-869. His service record was documented in German naval archives. His knife was now resting in John Chatterton's hands, recovered from a submarine that officially sank 5,000 miles away. The impossible wreck had a name: U-869. It had been assigned to patrol off Gibraltar, but it was actually destroyed off New Jersey. It was not killed by Allied depth charges, surface ships, or aircraft. It was killed by its own malfunctioning torpedo in waters it should never have been in.
50 years of official history were wrong. Every archive, every memorial, every condolence letter sent to grieving families had pointed to the wrong ocean. The dead finally had an accurate address. The identification of U-869 sent chatter waves through the naval history community. For 50 years, the official record had stated with absolute confidence that this submarine rested off the coast of Africa. The German naval archives had confirmed it. Allied records supported it. The families had been told. The memorials had been inscribed. Everyone agreed. Everyone was wrong. German naval historians were skeptical when first contacted. The records were clear, they insisted. U-869 was sunk near Gibraltar. The Americans must be mistaken about what they had found. But Chatterton had evidence that could not be dismissed. The knife with Hornberg's name. Photographs of the hull showing construction details consistent with a Type 9C-40. The torpedo tube configurations, the location of crew remains matching the roster of U-869. The historians reviewed the evidence. Then they reviewed it again. Then they quietly began the process of amending half a century of official documentation. The record was changed. U-869's final resting place was corrected from the eastern Atlantic to the western Atlantic, from African waters to American waters, from a known location to a site that had been invisible for 5 decades. The cause of loss was amended from Allied attack to probable torpedo malfunction. The historical correction rippled through archives and databases, but for the families of U-869 sailors, the implications were far more personal than an updated file entry. For 50 years, the relatives of U-869 sailors believed their sons and husbands died off Gibraltar.
Some had made pilgrimages to the Moroccan coast. They stood on beaches staring at water that they believed held their loved ones. They threw flowers into waves that carried them toward an empty stretch of ocean 5,000 meters from the actual grave. When Chatterton and his research partner Richie Kohler began contacting the German families, the reactions were complicated in ways that simple grief could not capture. Some families expressed profound gratitude. Finally, after decades of uncertainty, they knew the truth. The location was wrong, but at least now it was correct. They could update their private memorials. They could tell their children and grandchildren where great-grandfather actually rested. The truth, even a painful truth, was better than a comfortable lie. Others were devastated in ways they had not anticipated. Grief they believed they had processed decades earlier returned with unexpected force. Learning that their son had died in American waters rather than African waters changed nothing about his death, but somehow changed everything about their mourning. The grave they had imagined was fiction. The closure they thought they had achieved was built on false information. The hardest conversations involved what the evidence revealed about how the men died. Some families learned that their relatives had been in the control room. Those men died instantly when the torpedo struck. It was violent, but it was fast. There was no suffering, no prolonged terror, no slow suffocation in a sinking vessel.
The news was grim, but carried a strange mercy. Other families learned something worse. Their sons had been in the aft compartments. They had survived the initial explosion. They had sealed the watertight doors and listened to the forward sections flood. They had felt the submarine sink. They had waited in darkness for an end that took its time arriving. The evidence did not just tell families where their loved ones died, it told them how. And for some, that knowledge was not a gift. Friedrich Neuerberg, the brother of Commander Helmuth Neuerberg, traveled from Germany to New Jersey after the identification was confirmed. He stood on the deck of a boat positioned above the wreck site. Below him, 230 feet down in the darkness, his brother's submarine rested on the sand, the closest he would ever get to visiting the grave. He dropped flowers into the water. They floated briefly on the gray Atlantic swells, then scattered on the current and disappeared. 50 years of wondering had ended. His brother was here, not Gibraltar, here. The discovery forced uncomfortable questions beyond the personal grief of individual families. If official records were wrong about U-869, what else was wrong? How many other submarines, ships, aircraft, and soldiers were documented in incorrect locations? How many families had mourned at the wrong coordinates, visited the wrong memorials, believed the wrong stories?
Archives are compiled by humans under wartime conditions. Errors occur. Assumptions get treated as facts. Once something is written in an official document, it tends to stay written regardless of accuracy. The U-869 case proved that even the most confident historical conclusions can be completely mistaken.
It proved that official consensus means nothing if the underlying data is flawed. But the discovery also raised questions about cost. 3 divers died exploring U-869: Chrissy Rouse, and Steve Feldman. The submarine that had killed 56 German sailors in 1945 had claimed 3 more lives in the 1990s. The wreck had become a double graveyard, entombing both the original crew and those who sought to identify them. Some in the diving community argued the obsession was not worth the price. The German sailors were dead regardless of whether anyone identified them. Their families had already mourned. The historical record, while incorrect, affected nothing of practical importance. Leave the dead in peace. Let the mystery remain unsolved. No identification is worth a human life. Others believe the opposite. The divers who died were pursuing truth voluntarily, with full knowledge of the risks. The families who finally learned the accurate fate of their sons received closure that 50 years of official history had denied them. Truth has value, even when it comes at a cost. There is no resolution to this debate. There never is when the dead cannot speak for themselves. U-869 remains on the seafloor. Unlike military wrecks in European waters, it is not formally protected as a war grave under American law. Divers can still visit if they accept the substantial risks. Artifacts have been removed over the years. Some are displayed in museums, others sit in private collections. Bones have been disturbed, silt has been stirred, the interior has been altered by decades of exploration.
The ethical questions remain unresolved. Should the site be left undisturbed as a tomb? Should it be documented thoroughly before deterioration makes investigation impossible? Should remains be recovered and returned to Germany for proper burial? The submarine continues to decay. Salt water corrodes steel relentlessly. Eventually, the hull will collapse entirely, becoming an unrecognizable debris field. Whatever evidence remains inside, whatever secrets the boat still holds, will be lost when the structure fails. The window for learning from U-869 is closing year by year. The war ended 80 years ago. The arguments about how to treat its remnants continue. U-869 sits 60 miles off the coast of New Jersey, 230 feet down, closer to Atlantic City than to Gibraltar, where the world believed it rested for half a century. 56 men remain inside. Most were younger than 25 when they died. Some were teenagers who had never seen combat before their first and only patrol. They left Germany believing they were sailing toward Africa. They ended up in American waters, killed by their own torpedo, filed in the wrong location by their own Navy, forgotten in the wrong ocean for 50 years. The divers who found them paid for the discovery with obsession, with years of their lives, and in 3 cases with life itself. The families who learned the truth received answers they had stopped expecting. The historical record was corrected, one amended file at a time. The mystery is solved, the crew is identified, the coordinates are accurate now, but the water is still dark at 230 feet. The hull is still collapsing slowly into the sand. The bones are still scattered where violence left them, waiting for visitors who descend less frequently with each passing year.
The ocean kept its secret for 5 decades. It only surrendered the truth when someone was willing to die for it. Only amazing discoveries. Make sure subscribe and hit the bell icon. Share this video with friends and join the discussion on what these findings could mean. Your thoughts and questions are important, so let's explore incredible mysteries together.